You solemnly swear the evidence you give the court and jury in the case now and hearing to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Yes, I do.
Thank you. You may take the stand.
Put this one down.
Anytime you're ready, Ms. Jalali.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Could you please state your name and spell your last name for the record?
Paul O'Keefe, last name O''K''E''E''F''E.
And where do you live, sir?
I live in West Bridgewater, Massachusetts.
And how long have you lived there?
10 years.
And who, if anyone, do you live there with?
My wife, Erin, our 2 children,
And how old are your children?
13 and 10.
And both daughters, is that correct?
Correct.
And how long have you and your wife been together?
Together, 24 years total. Married for 17 almost.
Okay, what is your wife's name?
Erin,
And where did you grow up?
Braintree, Massachusetts.
And what are your parents' names?
My father is John, mother is Margaret.
And did you have any siblings?
2, yes. My sister Kristen. And, brother John.
And what was sort of the order in age as far as the siblings?
My sister was the oldest. My brother was the middle. I'm the youngest, so my sister was 5 years older than me, and my brother was 3.5 years older than me.
And do you work, sir?
I do.
What do you do for work?
I'm in sales for a company, Simmons Industries, which is a manufacturer of plumbing products.
How long have you been doing that?
12 years now.
Does your wife work as well?
She does.
What does she do?
She's in marketing. She works for a mechanical contractor out of Randolph.
And about how long has she been doing that?
She's been with her company for a year and a half now. Before that, she had a job working out of Boston for about 13 years.
And your brother John, did you call him John, or was there like a nickname or anything else that you referred to him?
I mean, we all called him Johnny, especially if you're a family.
And what did Johnny do for work?
Boston Police,
How long was he a member of the Boston Police?
16 years.
And within the Boston Police, where specifically did he sort of work?
He started in Hyde Park, Mattapan area, which I believe is E18, and transferred over to Dorchester, which is C11, and then downtown Boston for in the SOAR unit, which is the sex offender registry unit.
And when was it about that he started with the sex offender registry?
So after my sister had passed away in 2013, her husband passed away 2 months after that. My brother he took on responsibility of raising our niece and nephew. And so the Boston Police, to ensure that he was safe and protected, moved him to that unit in 2014.
And I'm sorry to ask you this, but your sister passed away in 2013, is that correct?
Correct.
And what did your sister Kristen pass away from?
She had an aggressive brain tumor, which is called glioblastoma.
And about how much time was it between the time that she sort of received the diagnosis to her passing?
5.5 months.
And you mentioned that you had a brother-in-law, Kristen's husband, is that correct?
Correct. Stephen Furbush, yes.
And when was it that he passed in relation to?
2 months later, which was January 12th, 2014.
And they, and by they I mean Kristen and Stephen Furbush, they had two children, is that correct?
Yes, 2 children, Kaylee and Patrick.
Which one is older?
Kaylee's the older. Patrick's a couple years younger than her, about 3 years.
How old are they now?
Kaylee is 16 and Patrick is 13.
And you mentioned, so initially when your sister Kristen passed away, what was sort of the family's plan as far as Haley and Patrick were concerned?
Can you repeat that?
Sure. So initially when your sister Kristen passed away and her husband Stephen was still alive, what was sort of the initial plan as far as with reference to the children?
We were kind of in scramble mode to figure out, how we were going to move forward. My wife and I had talked about having the kids come live with us. We had 2 small children at the time. 3 and 8 months were my children. We didn't have a, large enough house to take on 2 other children, so my brother stepped in, moved into the house in Canton, and raised them for 8 years.
And so around this time of 2013, your sister Kristen and her husband Stephen's children, about how old were they at this time that Johnny sort of took over?
Kaylee was 6, Patrick was 3.
Now, when your brother Johnny what if any sort of legal relationship did he have to your niece and nephew, Kaylee and Patrick?
He was made a legal guardian.
And where did he move from, and where did he move to when he assumed that role?
So he was living in Dorchester in a condo. He was living by himself, so he pretty much moved into my sister and brother-in-law's house in Canton. Lived there for, I want to say, 4 years until sold the house and bought a different house, which is also located in Canton.
Now, the initial house that your sister Kristen and her husband Stephen lived in with Kaylee and Patrick, about how long had they been living there before your brother Johnny moved in?
They were probably there for 5 or 6 years.
Prior to that, where had your sister Kristen and either of the children lived prior to moving into that house?
Yeah, so Kristen and Steve actually moved in with Johnny in Dorchester when Kaylee was just a baby. Lived with him for approximately a year before they bought their home in Canton.
Now, you mentioned that at some point your brother bought a second house in Canton and moved in there with the kids. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. Around what time was that?
I want to say 2017 or 2018 timeframe.
And they lived there up and through sort of January 28th, 29th of 2022. Is that correct?
Correct.
Now, around that particular time of January 2022, about how often did you see your brother Johnny and the kids, Kaylee and Pat?
I would say probably every other week, twice a month.
And your brother in particular, how often would you communicate with him during that time?
Communicate regularly, mostly through text messaging, a couple days a week, I would say.
Now, over the course of time, you said about 8 years or so that Johnny had sort of custody of Kaylee and Patrick, correct?
Correct.
And over that course of time, about how many relationships well, let me phrase this question first. About how many long-term relationships did your brother Johnny have with women over the course of that time? And before you get to that, if I could just ask you what your definition of long-term relationship is.
Long-term relationship is, over a year.
And so how many of those types of dating relationships that lasted for at least a year did your brother have during that time that he had the kids?
2.
And who were those 2 individuals?
Amy Fortney and Karen Reed.
And And this other individual, Amy, when about was it that your brother dated her?
2016, 2017 timeframe, I think.
And did this other woman that he dated named Amy, did she have children of her own?
Yeah, she had 2 sons.
Now, you mentioned 2, so other than Amy, who was the other one?
Her 2 sons' names are Gabriel and Christian.
No, I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
In reference to, you mentioned 2 women that your brother had dated for a long-term period, correct?
Yes, correct.
And one of them was the woman Amy that you were just speaking about, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And who was the second one?
Karen Reed.
And is Karen Reed someone that you had met through the course of your brother dating her?
Yes.
Just to be clear for the record, do you see Ms. Reed in the courtroom today? Can you identify as to where she's seated or an article of clothing that she's wearing?
Yep, she is seated right there between Mr. Giannetti and Mr. Jackson.
Just ask the record to reflect the identification of the defendant by the witness.
No
Yeah.
objection.
Yes.
Now, Mr. O'Keefe, when was it that you first met Karen?
I believe it was Mother's Day, so maybe May of 2020.
Now, prior to that, were you aware of any other time when Ms. Reed and your brother Johnny had dated in the past?
They dated very briefly in 2004.
And had you had occasion to meet her during that brief period where they dated in 2004?
I did not meet her back then, no.
And so the first time you met her would have been sometime in the spring of 2020, correct?
Correct.
And what was your understanding as far as when they had reconnected or gotten back together in reference to when you met her?
They reconnected. I believe my brother reached out to her in March of 2020, right at the beginning of COVID. I think he reached out to her via Facebook Messenger and then, text.
And they resumed some kind of relationship, and you had occasion to meet or see Karen Reed over the course of hanging out with your brother at various occasions, correct?
Correct, yep.
Now, about how often would you see Miss Reed? Would it be the same, more or less than when you saw your brother?
Almost the same, maybe a little less if my brother was just, it was just him and I or his friends, but for the most part, he was with Karen.
And as far as your understanding, what was sort of the living arrangements with regard to Miss Reed and your brother?
She has her own home in Mansfield, Massachusetts. She would stay at my brother's house in Canton, I would say 3, maybe 4 nights a week.
And that would be at your brother's house with both he and your niece and nephew?
Correct.
Now, with regard to, you mentioned that they reconnected sometime around the COVID-19 pandemic, is that correct?
Yes, correct.
And with regard to your brother and the defendant, Ms. Reed, and the children, what was sort of going on as far as school and work with regard to the pandemic, with regard to each of them?
So that was a period of time when schools were closed and kids had to do remote learning. So Kaylee and Patrick were both at home, remote learning, and my brother, didn't have a job where he can work remote, so he had to go into the office. And most of the time, Karen would be at home with the kids during the day while she worked remotely.
Now, you mentioned earlier that your brother had a legal guardianship role with regard to the children, correct?
Correct, yes.
What, if any, legal status or role did the defendant have with regard to the children?
She didn't have any.
Now, with regard to your brother and the defendant's relationship, what, if any, conversations did you have with your brother in regard to status of their relationship or any issues in their relationship?
He didn't say too much. If they were arguing, he might, give reference that they were arguing. Didn't really tell me what they were arguing about, but Mostly kept that stuff to himself.
What, if anything, did he mention to you as far as reasons for an argument or sort of points of contention?
He didn't like, if she would spend a lot of money on the kids for gifts, or, I know there was some arguments over, what she fed them, whether it's, Dunkin' Donuts or whatnot, but it was things along those lines.
Now, what, if any, what if any occasions, as far as they're arguing or anything like that, did you observe personally yourself?
Yeah, I witnessed, so they had rented a house down in Cape Cod. Say that was summer of 2021. I brought my two daughters down for a couple nights, and I witnessed, one intense fight between the two of them.
And as far as a fight, as you're characterizing that, was that anything physical or just for?
No, it was a verbal argument.
And what, if anything, was that verbal argument about?
It's hard to recall. I mean, I guess like typical couples fighting. There was alcohol had been involved. I recall her complaining that he wasn't nice to her, or something to that effect, and I was kind of the referee in that entire situation.
Now, when you make reference to alcohol involved, is that one or both, or
Both.
both your brother and the defendant?
Correct.
Now, if I could turn your attention to New Year's, and specifically New Year's Eve, going from 2021 into 2022. Do you recall that time?
I do.
And do you recall where you and your family were for that sort of New Year celebration?
Yeah, so I was with my wife and her family. We went to Aruba the day after Christmas in celebration of my wife's mother's 70th birthday.
So I'm just going to hold one sec for that siren.
Ms. Tillali, does it make sense that I give an instruction at this point? I'm going to see counsel at sidebar.
So during that New Year's Eve, you were in Aruba for your wife's mother's 70th birthday, correct?
Correct.
And was your brother, Johnny, was he also in Aruba around that same time frame?
Yes.
And your resort and your brother's resort, where were they in relation to each other?
They were pretty much on opposite sides of the island.
And at any point in time when you were in Aruba, did you see your brother at any point?
Unfortunately, we did not.
Now, you mentioned that you were there with your wife and your children, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, and do you know who your brother was in Aruba with around that same time?
He was with Karen Reed and brought the kids. So Kaylee and Patrick were with him. They were also with a large group, many other couples and families.
Do you know who was sort of the primary organizer of that group that your brother was with?
Yes, a friend of ours, Laura Sullivan.
And how did you know Laura Sullivan?
I knew Laura through my brother. She had dated my brother's partner and one of his best friends, Pat Rogers.
And did Miss Sullivan and Mr. Rogers have a child together?
Yes, and a boy.
And at some point, did Mr. Rogers pass away?
Yes.
What was sort of the relationship between your brother and Miss Sullivan in relation to Mr. Rogers' child?
Johnny was, so she has a son, Benjamin, who Johnny is godfather to.
And sort of towards the end of your stay in Aruba, with regard to the pandemic, what, if anything, happened to you or any other member of the family?
So my older daughter tested positive for COVID. So her and I kind of got left behind, stayed for an extra 3-4 days, I believe.
So after you returned from Aruba, at some point, were you and your brother trying to make plans to connect or to hang out or see each other at some point in January of 2022?
Yes, we were actually planning on getting together on January 29th.
And do you recall what day of the week that was?
That was a Saturday.
And why was it Saturday? Why were you sort of targeting Saturday as a meet point?
A weekend, no work. Kids didn't really have much on the schedule.
By that you mean your kids as well as
Correct.
your nephew?
Yes.
And then what, if anything, occurred with reference to those plans as far as them coming to a fruition or not?
A big snowstorm hit the area, and we said, maybe it's probably better if we just stay home and off the roads. So we kind of canceled getting together the day before.
So initially had a meeting for the 29th, but canceled it the day before on the 28th?
Correct.
So this snowstorm that you were talking about that was coming in, is that something that you and your brother were aware of prior to that day it happened?
Yes.
And was that something you learned of? Where did you learn about that?
The news.
So sort of all over the news, is that fair to say?
Correct. Yes.
And as far as did either your children, or John's children, for lack of a better term, niece and nephew, were there any sort of planned activities for that day that got canceled because of the weather or not?
On that Saturday, the 29th, I think everything was pretty much canceled. I don't know anything specific. We had, my daughters had basketball on Friday night, the night before, but we didn't really have any plans for the children on Saturday.
Now, turning your attention to that day of the 28th, so the day before that was a Friday, is that correct?
Yes, correct.
And you mentioned that your daughters had basketball that evening, is that correct?
Correct.
And what, if any, role do you have in regard to your daughter's basketball?
I coached both of their teams.
And so you coached 2 games that Friday night?
Correct.
And about what time do you know that if you know, did you sort of get home from all of that?
First game was at 6. Second game was at 7:15. So we got home 8:30ish.
And your wife was with you at both of your daughter's games?
Correct.
And when you got home, the snow that had been predicted, had it started at that point where you were?
I noticed the first flurries sometime between 10:30 and 11 p.m.
And if you know, approximately what time did you go to bed then?
Right around probably midnight.
And your wife, Erin, did she go to bed same time as you?
I think she went to bed a little before me, yes.
Now, earlier in that day, that Friday, the 28th, what, if any, conversation by any means did you have with your brother John?
My last communication with him was on a group text exchange that included myself, Karen Reed, and my mother. And he was excited because our niece Kaylee had gotten accepted to Bishop Fee in high school. So he was happy, proud dad moment. And then, Patrick's national math scores came back, and he scored extremely high. So he was extremely proud of Patrick that day as well.
So we had sort of sent, your brother John had sort of sent that to the group, which included yourself, your mother, and Miss Reed.
Correct.
And your niece Kaylee, as far as what grade was she in and what grade was she going into as far as that application to?
Yeah, so she was 8th grade going into 9th, freshman year in high school.
Now, you go to bed at some point in the evening of the 28th, and you woke up on the 29th. Do you recall what woke you up on that morning?
Yes, my mother called me at 6:40 a.m.
Is that something typical?
No. She called and just said, something happened to your brother. They found him in the snow, and they took him to the hospital.
And which hospital was it?
Good Samaritan in Brockton, Massachusetts.
And at that point, did you, or what, if any, other sort of information did you have as to what had happened to your brother?
I really didn't know much until I got to the hospital. While I was at the hospital, my cousin works 911 dispatch, so she came down because she had heard